I've never cared much for the spotlight. Warren's the one people like to parade on magazine covers, and that suits me just fine. My satisfaction has always come from shaping ideas, pushing back when he needs someone to argue, and keeping my own compass steady, even if it points away from the crowd. Warren once called me the abominable no man, and I rather enjoy that title. It means I've done my job, saved him from mistakes, reminded him that optimism without discipline is just a different form of ignorance. But if you really want to understand me, you can't just start at Berkshire. You've got to roll the reel back to Omaha, 1924, January 1st. The world was staggering from war, about to stumble into depression, and I was the first child of Alfred and Florence Munger. My grandfather was a federal judge. My father was a lawyer who built his own practice. You might say the law ran in our blood, but so did skepticism, and that part came from me. When I was a boy, I worked at Buffett & Son, the grocery store owned by Warren's grandfather. I was just tall enough to stack shelves and already old enough to notice how brutally simple work could be. 12-hour days, no meals, no breaks, and at the end of it, we had to hand over 2 pennies of our wages for Social Security, then listen to Grandpa Buffett lecture us about the evils of socialism. Imagine that. You're bone-tired, your stomach is growling, and your boss tells you freedom is being taxed 2 cents at a time. That lesson stuck with me, not so much the politics, but the reminder that the world doesn't hand out comfort. School never intimidated me. I read everything I could get my hands on: biographies, science, Franklin sayings. I had teachers who thought I was bright but irritating because I liked challenging the rules they treated as sacred. By the time I was 14, I was sneaking into Dr. Davis's medical library. He was a family friend and devouring journals on surgery and statistics. Most kids my age were worrying about acne. I was fascinated with probability curves and death rates in urology. At home, I raised hamsters. Not exactly glamorous, but I learned fast about negotiation, trading the common brown ones for rarer colors or larger breeds. My basement smelled like a petting zoo, and my mother finally forced me to shut it down. But that tiny venture, 35 squeaking animals and a few shrewd trades, was my first business education. I learned margins matter, smells matter, and sometimes shutting down is the best choice. Central High School polished me up. Too small for football, I found my place on the rifle team, eventually becoming captain. It wasn't the most popular sport, but it gave me discipline, accuracy, and the satisfaction of hitting a target dead center. And in a way, that's all investing, is pulling the trigger only when the sights line up. The Great Depression swept through Omaha like a winter storm. We weren't to crush the way others, where my father's practice kept food on the table, but I saw neighbors ruin. Hobos walked our streets. Some offered to sweep a porch for a sandwich. Others just begged. My grandfather, the judge, put nearly half his savings at risk rescuing a family bank. My father argued cases all the way to the Supreme Court, sometimes losing, sometimes winning, but always steady enough to keep us afloat. Watching them, I learned the value of resilience, of betting heavy when principle was at stake, and of accepting losses without self-pity. When I left for the University of Michigan, I chose mathematics. Numbers made sense. They didn't lie to you the way people did. Physics soon caught me to the way it tackled the unknown with theory, experiment, and ruthless clarity. I thought, life ought to be lived more like physics. Less emotion, more models. And that thought never left me. World War II interrupted everything. Days after turning 19, I joined the Army Air Corps. They shipped me across the country like luggage New Mexico, then Caltech in California, where I studied meteorology. Predicting weather back then was like betting on horse races, with old data more art than science. But even that taught me, models matter, but they're never perfect. Somewhere in the middle of that chaos, I got married. Nancy Huggins was my first wife, and soon we had a son, Teddy. But life can be cruel. We divorced. Then Teddy fell ill with leukemia. I was 29, walking Pasadena streets at night, crying after hospital visits, powerless to save my child. That pain never really leaves you. It carved a toughness into me, but also a sympathy for anyone facing fate's blind cruelty. Law was my first profession, though not my destiny. Harvard let me in without a bachelor's degree, thanks to my father's connections and my own stubbornness. I graduated magna cum laude, moved west, and joined a firm in Los Angeles. But soon I grew restless. The income was fine, the respect was decent, but I wanted independence, not billable hours. I wanted capital. So I built it. I invested in stocks. I partnered with clients in real estate, building condos near Caltech. It was a family dinner back in Omaha that finally brought Warren and me face to face. The Davis family introduced us. We sat across the table, two talkative Midwesterners who both thought faster than we should, and within minutes, it was obvious. This was a partnership. Not the kind inked on contracts, but the kind sealed by a handshake and mutual respect. We argued, laughed, tested each other's ideas, and realized that if one of us missed something, the other probably would too. But when we both saw it, when we both agreed, that was enough to bet big. From then on, our lives intertwined. I ran an investment partnership that compounded at nearly 20% a year. Though with sharper swings than Warren's, I preferred concentration betting heavily on a few good ideas. That meant deeper valleys when the bear markets of 73 and 74 hit, but it also meant higher peaks. Eventually, I shut the partnership down and rolled the money into Berkshire, where I could work alongside Warren without the nuisance of managing clients. What people forget is that none of this was inevitable. At every stage, Buffett and Son, hamsters in the basement, rifle team captain, law firm partner, I could have settled. I could have stayed ordinary. But somewhere deep inside me was a relentless whisper. Don't stop here. Think harder. Go further. Don't just follow the crowd. And that's what brought me to Warren, to Berkshire, and to the life I've lived. You can call it luck. You can call it persistence. I call it compounding of money, yes, but more importantly, of wisdom. And wisdom, unlike money, can't be taxed or stolen. It only grows if you keep adding to it. Let me tell you something I figured out a long time ago. Life's not a clean lab experiment. It's messy. But if you want to get anywhere worth going, you've got to learn how to think clearly in all that mess. That's the whole game. Not being the smartest in the room, but being the least confused. Most folks make decisions the way a raccoon chooses dinner quick, impulsive, and based on whatever shiny thing they see first. Me? I train myself to think more like a scientist and less like a gambler. That's not just a style, it's a survival strategy. See, I never put much stock in conventional education. It has its uses, sure, but I found more wisdom in the real world. My real education came from reading broadly, reflecting deeply, and watching carefully. You'll be amazed how much you can learn if you just sit still and pay attention. Not just to what people say, but to how they act, where they trip, and what they ignore. I started building what I call a lattice work of mental models. That sounds highfalutin, I know. But it's just a fancy way of saying, gather the best thinking tools from every discipline, physics, biology, psychology, engineering, economics, and connect them like beams in a bridge. The more models you know, the more ways you can see a problem. And more importantly, you can avoid the dumbest decisions. Want to know what makes people stumble most? It's not a lack of information. It's misjudgment. They misread their own intentions. They misread others. And they misread the landscape. They get cocky, greedy, impatient, distracted. I made a study of human misjudgment, like some people collect stamps. And let me tell you, our brains are wired for error. Take incentives. They're like a magnet pulling people's behavior, even if they don't realize it. Show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome. That simple rule has saved me millions. People will rationalize anything if the paycheck is fat enough. So when I'm analyzing a business or a person, I look at the incentive structure first. Before the spreadsheets, before the mission statement. Because that's where the truth lives. Another trap? Social proof. You know the drill. Everyone else is doing it. So it must be right. Wrong. The crowd's often headed straight off a cliff. If you want to be wise, you've got to learn how to stand alone. Sometimes the smartest voice in the room is the one that says, let's wait. And let's not forget commitment bias. Once someone invests time, money, or ego into an idea, they'll fight to defend it even if it's obviously wrong. It's like betting on a horse that's already collapsed but refusing to admit it. Me? I try to kill my own ideas early. If something doesn't hold up, I'd rather toss it than let it sink me later. That's why I'm a fan of what I call inversion thinking. Instead of asking, what should I do to succeed? Ask, what should I avoid so I don't fail? It's easier to sidestep stupidity than to chase brilliance. You don't have to outrun the bear, just avoid the slowest mistakes. I also learned that long-term thinking is a superpower. In a world addicted to the next quarter, the next headline, the next dopamine hit, patience stands out. Warren and I built Berkshire Hathaway on a simple principle: buy great businesses and hold on tight. It's amazing what happens when you stop trying to outsmart the market every 10 minutes. And just wait for the right pitch. And don't forget the power of simplicity. The world's complicated enough. If your solution isn't elegant, if it can't be explained clearly on the back of an envelope, it's probably flawed. I always say, take a simple idea seriously. Ride it until it stops working, and then get off gracefully. Now, none of this matters if you're not honest with yourself. Self-delusion is a quiet killer. It doesn't make a sound, it just seeps in and clouds your judgment. You want to get better at decision-making? Start by getting better at telling yourself the truth, even when it stings. I also believe in revising your beliefs. Change your mind when the facts change. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Too many people get married to their opinions and end up in a shotgun wedding with disaster. So what's the takeaway? Don't be a slave to trends. Build your own models. Stay curious. Think for yourself. Read everything you can get your hands on. Treat your brain like a muscle. Keep lifting. And when in doubt, step back and ask, what's really going on here? What am I missing? Where could I be wrong? Life rewards discipline. It rewards humility. It rewards those who stay calm when the world loses its mind. That's how you win, by avoiding the dumb stuff, thinking clearly, and never stopping the climb. And that's how I live. If you've ever heard me speak in public, you know I don't exactly rehearse. I talk the way I think, straightforward, off the cuff, and without fluff. Some people call them Mungerisms. I just call it being honest. No script, no polish, just a man trying to share what life's taught him without wasting your time. You want the truth? Most of what I've learned came from watching other people mess up. That's not cynicism. It's practicality. If you study disasters, business flops, divorces, bankruptcies, personal meltdowns, you'll see patterns. People ignore reality. They get lazy, greedy, or arrogant. Then they wonder what went wrong. It's like ignoring gravity and complaining when you fall. So I made a habit of saying things people don't want to hear. If you keep doing that, you're going to blow up. Or that idea's dumber than a box of hammers. I don't mean to be rude. I just figure clarity is kinder than comfort when it comes to avoiding big mistakes. Let me give you an example. People love to chase hot trends. Bitcoin, .com stocks, real estate bubbles. But I always ask the same thing. What's the actual value underneath all the noise? Because if there's no substance, it'll all come crashing down. You don't need a PhD to see that, just a willingness to call baloney when you smell it. And don't get me started on envy. That stuff will rot your soul. I've seen millionaires lose sleep because their neighbor made a dime more. It's absurd. If you're going to compare downward. It's a much happier way to live. But better yet, don't compare at all. Run your own race. Focus on being useful. I've said it 1,000 times. The safest way to get what you want is to deserve what you want. Sounds simple, but most folks don't want to hear that. They'd rather hear about shortcuts. But the world isn't stupid. Sooner or later, it catches up. And when it does, all the clever tricks fall apart. I've also got no time for people who can't say, "I don't know." That's one of the most powerful phrases in the English language. Because the minute you admit ignorance, you open the door to learning. But people hate that. They'd rather bluff, fake confidence, double down on nonsense. Me? I say, be the guy who says, "I don't know," more often than the guy who pretends he knows everything. Here's another thing. Never underestimate the power of incentives. You can't fix a bad system with good intentions. If you want people to behave a certain way, design a system that rewards that behavior. Don't moralize engineer. That's how you get results. I once told someone, if you don't understand the power of incentives, you don't understand anything. And I meant it. We're all tugged around by what we want: money, praise, attention. Most people won't admit it. But I say, let's just be honest about what drives us. Then we can design systems that work, not ones that should work in some imaginary world. Now, people love to ask, "Charlie, what's your secret to success?" I always tell them, avoid doing stupid things. That's it. No fancy formula. Just common sense. Apply consistently. Want to avoid bankruptcy? Don't over-leverage. Want to avoid regret? Don't lie to yourself. Want to stay married? Pick the right person and be someone they want to stay with. And here's a big one. Don't be a jerk. Life's too short to be surrounded by toxic people or to be the toxic person. I never partner with someone I didn't trust. Not once. Because the moment you invite dysfunction into your business or your life, you're asking for pain. Character matters more than credentials. Now, I get it, some of these ideas aren't exactly warm and fuzzy, but I didn't get where I am by sugarcoating. I got here by thinking clearly, acting decisively, and surrounding myself with people who do the same. So yeah, maybe I sound blunt. Maybe I crack a few jokes that sting. But if you walk away remembering just one thing, let it be this. The world doesn't reward wishful thinking. It rewards reason, resilience, and the rare ability to say, maybe I'm wrong, let's take another look. That mindset, that's the real edge. You know, if I could get every young person to sit down and listen to one idea, just one, it'd be this. The world doesn't reward narrow brilliance. It rewards broad understanding. That's what I call worldly wisdom. And it's not something you get from cramming facts or memorizing formulas. It's something you build, piece by piece, like a mosaic. Let me explain it like this. If your brain is a toolbox, most people walk around with just one wrench. Maybe it's finance, or psychology, or engineering. And sure, they get pretty good with that wrench. But then life hands them a problem that needs a screwdriver, or a hammer. And what do? They keep reaching for that same old wrench. That's how otherwise smart people make dumb decisions. So I decided early on I'd collect tools. Mental models from every discipline that offered useful insight. Not just economics and accounting, though I certainly studied those, but also biology, physics, literature, history. And not the superficial stuff. I dug in. I wanted the key ideas, the ones that actually change how you see the world. Think of these models as filters. Each one strips away illusion in a different way. When used together, they give you a kind of X-ray vision. Suddenly, you can see beneath the noise, the emotion, the nonsense. You can see the structure underneath reality. Let's take physics. Now, I don't need to launch rockets, but understanding things like inertia or thermodynamics helps me see how systems behave. If something's in motion, it tends to stay in motion. That applies to markets, businesses, even habits. Or biology evolution, feedback loops, ecosystems. You start seeing businesses as living organisms. Adaptation, survival, extinction, it's all there. The same patterns, just in a different wrapper. Psychology, though, that one's the heavy hitter. Because we're all walking around in human brains, and they're not built for truth. They're built for survival. That means shortcuts, biases, heuristics. We're overconfident. We seek patterns where there are none. We hate uncertainty. And if you're not aware of that, you'll fall into every trap in the book. I call it man with a hammer syndrome. If the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I studied this stuff: behavioral economics, prospect theory, cognitive biases. Not because I wanted to be a psychologist, but because I wanted to not be stupid. If you know your brain is playing tricks on you, you can catch yourself in the act. That's half the battle. Now, don't think for a second that I'm trying to be a polymath. I'm not trying to master every subject. I'm trying to understand the big ideas that govern each field, like gravity in physics or incentives in economics, the stuff that repeats, the stuff that explains the most with the least. That's the beauty of mental models. They compound. Use them together, and suddenly you're thinking on a level most people never reach. It's like combining sight and sound. You go from reading lips to hearing the whole conversation. Here's something else. I avoid complexity when I can. The world's complicated enough, but most truths are simple if you know where to look. Take compound interest, or opportunity cost, or margin of safety. These are plain ideas, but they're powerful. If you take them seriously, they'll guide your whole life. But it's not just about the models. It's about how you use them. You've got to be disciplined, curious, willing to challenge your own beliefs. The worst thing you can do is fall in love with your ideas. That's how you go blind. I always say, you don't need to be a genius. You just need to take a handful of really good ideas and apply them consistently. And when you run into a problem you don't understand, don't bluff. Just admit it. Step back. Learn more. Come back stronger. That's what worldly wisdom is. It's not flashy. It's not fast. But it works. It saves you from disaster. It helps you spot opportunity. And most of all, it helps you become someone who deserves to win. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. In the long run, the world usually gets it right. The people who think clearly, act wisely, and stay humble, those are the ones who finish strong. Let's not kid ourselves, our brains are glitchy. Marvelous, sure, but also flawed in sneaky, invisible ways. You and I walk around thinking we're rational creatures. We're not. We're emotional, tribal, lazy pattern recognizers. And once you understand that, everything starts making a whole lot more sense. I became obsessed with this idea. Why do smart people do dumb things? Why do they double down on bad bets? Why do they miss obvious signs of trouble? Turns out, there's a whole catalog of biases baked into the human mind like bugs in the software. You can't delete them, but you can learn to spot them. Let me start with a simple one: reward and punishment. People respond to incentives, sometimes in ways you'd never expect. Give a man a bonus for short-term profits, and don't be surprised when he cuts corners. Want loyalty? Reward it. Want people to lie? Put them in a position where truth costs them. It's predictable like gravity. That's why I always say, never, ever think you understand a person until you understand their incentives. Then there's consistency bias. Once we take a stand, we feel pressure internal and external to stick with it, even when it's wrong. Even when new facts come in, we rationalize, we dig in. Politicians are famous for it, but so are the rest of us. I've done it. So I developed a habit. When I feel myself defending an idea too eagerly, I pause and ask, am I still right or just unwilling to be wrong? And don't forget social proof. You're at a meeting. Everyone's nodding. No one speaks up. You don't want to be the outlier, so you go along. Happens in boardrooms. Happens in classrooms. Happens in history. But wisdom doesn't live in the crowd. It lives in courage, the willingness to speak when others won't. There's also reciprocation. We're wired to return favors, even if we didn't ask for them. Give someone a freebie, and they feel they owe you. That's why salespeople hand you little gifts. It's not generosity, it's strategy. They're triggering a lever in your brain that says, I better buy something now. Once you spot it, it's almost funny. Almost. Contrast bias is another one. Show someone a $1,000 suit next to a $5,000 suit, and the $1,000 suit looks cheap. But show it next to a $200 one, and suddenly it feels expensive. The item didn't change, just your frame of reference did. The world's full of illusions like that. Learn to step back. Authority bias? That's a killer. Put someone in a uniform or give them a title, and suddenly they get a free pass. People stop questioning, but being an expert doesn't mean being right. I've met plenty of experts who couldn't find their own rear ends with both hands and a flashlight. And let's not ignore availability bias. Whatever is easiest to remember feels more important. That's why plane crashes make people nervous, even though car accidents are more common. It's why recent news stories feel like permanent trends. The loudest memory wins, not the truest one. There's more. Liking bias? If we like someone, we trust them more, even if they're wrong. Disliking bias? If we dislike someone, we assume they're wrong, even when they're not. We don't see ideas, we see people. And that clouds everything. And finally, the big one, confirmation bias. Once we believe something, we only look for evidence that confirms it. We ignore what contradicts it. We build echo chambers. We become blind to anything that might challenge our narrative. It's human nature, but it's poison for decision-making. So what do? Well, first we study this stuff. We name the traps. We memorize the patterns, because awareness is the first defense. Then we build systems checklists, peer reviews, habits of skepticism. We question our assumptions. We invite disagreement. We slow down, especially when emotions are high. And we stay humble. Because here's the truth. You'll never outgrow your own psychology. You'll never be immune to these biases. I'm not. Warren's not. No one is. But if you respect the limits of your mind, if you stay vigilant, if you're willing to say, I was wrong, then you've got a fighting chance. In the end, the biggest risk isn't making a bad call. It's thinking you're above making one. Let me be blunt, most decisions are garbage. Not because people are dumb, but because they rush. They guess. They go with their gut. That's fine when you're picking ice cream. But when you're allocating capital, hiring someone, committing your time and reputation, that calls for something better. I'm a checklist guy. Not because it's sexy, but because it works. Pilots use checklists. Surgeons use checklists. And if they can't rely on memory under pressure, what makes you think you can? I started building mine the same way I built everything else, one mistake at a time. Here's the core idea. A checklist saves you from your worst impulses. It forces you to slow down, to think. It breaks you out of autopilot. And when done right, it can save you millions, maybe even your life. When I look at a business or any decision, really, I run it through a mental gauntlet. Is it simple? Understandable? Does it rely on consistent, proven patterns? Or is it some shiny new thing promising the moon? Because if I can't explain it to a reasonably intelligent 10-year-old, I don't want it. Then I ask, what are the incentives here? Are the people involved honest? Are their interests aligned with mine? You can't trust structures where people get paid to do the wrong thing. That's a road to ruin. Next comes durability. Is this built to last? Or is it a sandcastle waiting for the tide? I want staying power. I want models that can take a punch. Because life will punch you. Then I check for arrogance. My own, mainly. Am I assuming I know more than I do? Am I stretching outside my circle of competence? That's where disaster lives. In the gap between what you think you know and what you actually know. And I always ask, what are the second and third order effects? People focus on the immediate, but consequences ripple. Raise prices, do customers flee? Cut costs, does quality suffer? You've got to play out the whole movie, not just the opening scene. Now, don't think I walk around with a clipboard. This isn't about rigidity. It's about discipline. It's about refusing to be lazy when it matters most. A checklist reminds me that I'm fallible, that emotions cloud judgment, that complexity is a breeding ground for error. One of my favorite checks. Invert, always invert. What could go wrong? What am I not seeing? How could this blow up in my face? Most people don't ask those questions. They're too in love with upside. But I've learned if you avoid the big downsides, the upside often takes care of itself. I also ask, has anything like this worked before? If not, why do I think it'll work now? History may not repeat, but it sure rhymes. And ignoring those rhymes, that's how you get humbled. But perhaps the most important thing on my checklist is silence. I sit with a decision. I let it breathe. I give it time to reveal itself, because some errors need time to surface. And if you're always in a rush, you'll never see them coming. People think checklists are for beginners. They're not. They're for pros who see enough disasters to know they're always one unchecked box away from the next one. I don't trust memory. I trust systems. And when my money or reputation is on the line, I want that system to catch what my brain might miss. So here's my pitch. Build your own checklist. Tailor it to your life, your work, your temperament. Make it ugly, make it nerdy, I don't care. Just make it real. Use it when it's hardest, especially when you feel confident. Because confidence isn't a sign you're right. Often, it's the first warning that you might be wrong. Let me tell you, when it comes to people, there's no substitute for quality. Not just skills or resumes or test scores. I mean the real stuff. Integrity, curiosity, horse sense. That elusive mix that makes someone not just capable, but dependable over the long haul. I call it the right stuff. And no, it's not some vague compliment. It's a checklist in my head shaped by years of watching who rises and who self-destructs. And I'll be honest, spotting it is as much art as science. But once you've seen it in action, you know. So, what does the right stuff look like? First, extreme reliability. When someone says they'll do something, they do it. No excuses. No drama. Just results. These are the folks who make things happen quietly, steadily, without needing constant prodding. You can build empires on people like that. Next, rationality. I'm talking calm, clear thinking. The ability to detach from ego and emotion and see things as they are. The best decision makers I know aren't the flashes. They're the steadiest. They don't get seduced by fads or panicked by setbacks. They stay grounded. Then there's energy. Not caffeine-fueled frenzy, but a kind of inner drive. A restlessness. The sense that they're not just filling a chair, they're pushing forward. You give these people a small role, and they make it bigger. Not because they're show-offs, but because they can't help but improve things. And you need curiosity. The right people are always learning, always tinkering. They read. They ask questions. They hate sitting still intellectually. That's how they stay relevant and how they catch problems before they explode. But here's the kicker character. I don't care how smart or skilled someone is. If they cut corners, if they treat people poorly, if they lie when it's convenient, they're a liability. In the short run, that stuff can be hidden. But over time, it compounds in the worst way. You also want people who handle adversity well, because sooner or later, things will go sideways. And how someone reacts, whether they point fingers or roll up their sleeves, tells you everything. Now, finding people with the right stuff is hard. They don't advertise. They don't always look impressive on paper. But they leave a trail teams that perform better, crises that get handled, problems that vanish before they're noticed. And when you find them, treat them like gold. Give them trust. Give them room. Give them ownership. Because nothing supercharges results like putting the right person in the right seat. I've made money by spotting value in businesses. But I've kept money by partnering with people who had the right stuff. Folks like Warren. Folks who made me better just by standing next to them. So my advice? Spend less time chasing brilliance and more time cultivating substance. Look for judgment, for backbone, for follow-through. That's where the magic happens. Not in spreadsheets, but in people. I've said it before, reality doesn't care about your feelings. And sometimes, the world teaches you with a punch, not a nudge, not a whisper, a straight-up punch in the gut. That's how I learned one of my most important lessons. Let me take you back. There was this time, I won't name names, where everything seemed golden. The numbers looked right. The people seemed competent. The plan made sense, but I missed one thing: character. The key player had a history I glossed over. I figured the incentives would straighten him out. They didn't. He turned out to be a crook. Not the cartoon kind with a mask and a bag of loot. The charming kind. The kind that tells you what you want to hear, right until the trap shuts. And when it did, the fallout was brutal. Not just financially. It was a credibility hit. I don't get mad easily. But that one stung, because I knew better. I'd ignored the rule. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. The signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. So I paid tuition to the School of Hard Knocks. Now, the punch wasn't the end of the world. I've taken worse. But what it did do was reinforce something I now preach like gospel. There are no good deals with bad people. Doesn't matter how attractive the terms are. If the character's not there, walk. Don't run walk with dignity and clarity. And here's the deeper insight. Life's lessons often come wrapped in discomfort. You lose money. You lose trust. You lose time. But what you gain if you're paying attention is judgment. Scar tissue becomes armor. And that's worth more than whatever you lost. I've always admired people who learn from others' mistakes. But most of us, myself included, learn best when we feel the consequences personally. That's human. What's inexcusable is not learning. Getting punched and walking into the next fight with your hands still down. So I adapted, hardened my filters, tightened my standards, raised the bar on who I trust, who I partner with, who I listen to. Not out of cynicism, but out of realism. The older I get, the more I believe. The world keeps testing you until you prove you've learned. Fail the same test twice, and the blame's on you. That lesson, though painful, made me sharper. And if you've ever taken a hit good, that means you're in the game. Just make sure next time you duck. I never saw giving as some kind of halo act. To me, it's more like intelligent investing with impact as the return. The question I ask isn't how much, it's how well. And let me tell you, most of what passes for giving isn't thoughtful, it's social theater. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not against generosity, quite the opposite, but giving money is easy. Giving well, that takes work. It takes clarity. And above all, it takes the humility to admit you don't always know what works. That's the mistake I see most often. People throwing money at causes like it's confetti at a parade. The intentions are noble. The results? Often a mess. Buildings with no purpose. Programs with no follow-up. Resources poured into models that haven't worked in decades. Here's my rule. Philanthropy should be run like a business, a really good one. You study outcomes. You demand evidence. You scale what works and shut down what doesn't. You hire smart people and let them make decisions. And most of all, you remember, it's not about your name on a plaque. It's about creating lasting change. I've always admired Andrew Carnegie's line, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced." But I'd add a twist: the man who gives without thought dies ineffective. The world doesn't need more symbolic acts. It needs strategic ones. The best givers I've seen are skeptics. They challenge assumptions. They ask tough questions. They test ideas in the real world. And when something fails, they don't cry, they learn. That's philanthropy with teeth. You also have to be realistic. You can't fix everything. Not every dollar saves the world. So you pick your spots. You go deep, not wide. And you play the long game. No quick wins, just compounding good over time. Me? I chose causes that align with my principles. Education, libraries, architecture, things that elevate thinking and preserve beauty, not because they're flashy, but because they last, because they raise the floor for generations. But even more than that I gave because it kept me grounded. Because when you've been lucky in life, giving back isn't charity. It's responsibility. It's balance. So here's my pitch. If you're going to give, really give. Not to soothe your ego. Not to impress your friends. Give to make a dent. Give with rigor. Give like a builder, not a donor. That's how giving stops being soft and starts changing the world. Let's talk about the things people ignore, the quiet variables, the background noise, the boring but essential gears that keep the machine running. You know, the parts that don't make headlines, but decide whether the whole thing works or blows up. We're in a world addicted to flash. Everyone wants the silver bullet, the genius insight, the bold prediction. But what really matters, more often than not, are the things that don't change. Fundamentals, systems, little things, done consistently, that don't grab attention but shape outcomes. Take accounting, for example. Most people yawn. But I'll tell you, without reliable numbers, you're flying blind. It's like trusting a speedometer that lies. A tiny error in the books can lead to colossal misunderstanding. You think you're rich, you're not. You think a business is healthy, it's rotting from within. That's not boring. That's survival. Or consider maintenance. Everyone celebrates the launch, the new building, the fresh strategy. But who sticks around to check the plumbing? Who makes sure the software stays patched, the process stays tight? It's the unglamorous stuff that keeps empires from crumbling. Then there's culture. The invisible hand that shapes decisions when no one's watching. Culture isn't a slogan on a wall. It's the daily habits, how people treat each other, how truth is handled, how accountability works. When culture goes bad, it doesn't announce itself. It whispers slowly until the walls collapse. I've watched great ventures fail not from lack of talent or funding, but from ignoring the boring stuff. They got seduced by the top line. They didn't inspect the basement. And let's talk incentives. Everyone thinks they understand them. Few actually do. The wrong incentive can corrupt even the best people. And the scariest part? Most corruption doesn't start with bad intent. It starts with rationalizing. Just this once. Everyone's doing it. That's the slope, my friend. And it's greased. So yes, some things in life are less flashy. They don't make for exciting speeches. But they're the backbone of durability. They're the difference between a business that lasts and one that flames out in glory. My advice? Learn to love the boring details. Study the footnotes. Double-check the inputs. Ask the dull questions. Because over time, the people who respect the less glamorous truth, those are the people who win. In the end, consistency beats brilliance. Integrity beats charisma. And the boring things? They're often the most important things of all. You can't live long without bumping into death. It's a rude guest. Shows up uninvited. Stays as long as it pleases. But if you're lucky and smart, you can learn something from it. That's what I've tried to do. When you're young, you think you're bulletproof. Then someone close to you dies. Suddenly the clock ticks louder. You start asking questions you never bothered with before. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? Does any of this matter? I've spent years sitting with those questions. Not in a monastery, just in real life. Watching friends go. Watching the world change. And through it all, I've come to believe something simple. Meaning isn't something you find. It's something you build. Every decision, every habit, every relationship, you're laying bricks. Some people build cathedrals. Others build prisons. Most people don't realize they're building anything at all. Now, I'm not saying you need to chase grand purpose. That's often a trap. People get lost in abstraction. What matters more is how you live, with integrity, with curiosity, with responsibility. You show up. You do your part. You treat people well. That's meaning. But death, oh, death sharpens the picture. It reminds you not to waste time. Not to defer the good stuff, not to take people for granted. It teaches you that legacy isn't a statue or a trust fund. It's the ripple you leave in people's lives. You know, I've buried friends. Brilliant ones. Flawed ones. Some were kind. Some were jerks. But you know what people remembered? Not their IQ. Not their net worth. They remembered how they made them feel. That's your real resume. So here's what I try to do. I live like someone's watching, not in a paranoid way, but in a way that honors the influence I have. Every moment is a choice. Build something better or break something down. And when my time comes, and it will, I hope people say, he helped. He made sense. He didn't waste it. That's enough for me. Life isn't a puzzle you solve. It's a story you write. And death? Death is the punctuation mark that makes the sentence matter. You want to know how I think? It's simple, though not easy. My whole approach is built on a foundation of curiosity, discipline, and a stubborn refusal to fool myself. That last part's important. Because if there's one person you mustn't lie to, it's yourself. People love to complicate things. They invent systems, gurus, jargon. Me, I prefer tools. A good mental model is like a Swiss Army knife. It won't do the thinking for you, but it'll help you slice through the nonsense. I didn't wake up one day with a master plan. I built my mind the way a carpenter builds a workshop one tool at a time. Math, psychology, engineering, biology, history. Each one gives me a different lens. And the more lenses I have, the clearer the picture becomes. Now, here's the trick. You've got to actually use the tools. It's not enough to read a book or watch a lecture. You've got to think with them. Wrestle with them. See how they fit together. And when they don't fit, ask why. That's where most people stop. They collect ideas like stamps. I use them like hammers. Learning isn't about credentials. It's about results. If you don't remember it, or worse, can't apply it, you never really learned it. So I study broadly. I ask dumb questions. I stay skeptical. And I always look for the edge, some hidden assumption, some blind spot, some place where everyone else is asleep at the wheel. That's what decision-making is after all. Seeing what others miss, avoiding what others ignore, saying no to 99 things so you can say yes to one great thing. But I also build in fail-safes. I assume I'm wrong. I double-check. I invert problems, look at them backward. I imagine disaster before success. I ask, how could this go horribly? Before I ask, how great could this be? And I always keep emotion in check. Because emotion is a liar. It shouts over logic. It clouds vision. You want to make better decisions? Start by calming down. This approach, it's not magic. It's not even new, but it works. Over time, it compounds. You get a little wiser, a little faster, a little more accurate. And pretty soon, you're living a different life, not because you're smarter, but because you're thinking better. That's the Munger way. Not flashy, not fast, but solid. And in a world obsessed with shortcuts, being solid is a superpower. Now, if there's one subject I could shout from the rooftops, it's this one: how our minds deceive us. We like to think we're rational creatures, logical, objective, masters of our thoughts. But the truth? We're often just clever apes, reacting to invisible levers pulled by nature, nurture, and noise. And once you see those levers, really see them, you'll never unsee them. Suddenly, the world makes more sense. The mistakes people make, the blunders you commit, the madness in markets, politics, relationships, it all comes into focus. Let me walk you through the greatest hits of human error. Start with incentives. You show me the incentives, I'll show you the behavior. People don't do what makes sense, they do what they're rewarded for. That includes you. That includes me. It's not evil. It's biology. Misaligned incentives have sunk empires, wrecked companies, and corrupted saints. Then there's consistency bias. Once we've taken a position, we stick with it, often long past the point of reason. Why? Because changing our mind feels like admitting we were wrong, and our egos would rather go down with the ship. Social proof might be the most dangerous one. If everyone's doing it, we assume it's safe, smart, or right. But everyone is often just a mob in disguise. History books are littered with mass delusions. Don't forget authority bias. Someone in a lab coat says, do this, and suddenly we do. Doesn't matter if the advice is awful. We like to outsource our thinking to people who look confident. Now, layer in deprivation superreaction syndrome, that wild panic when something we value gets taken away. Suddenly, we fight, cheat, steal. Rational thought flies out the window. Then mix and contrast misreaction. This one's sneaky. We judge things not on their own merits, but compared to what came before. That's why a $10 soda at the airport seems reasonable, next to a $20 sandwich. Add availability bias. What's easiest to remember feels most true. So a shark attack on the news makes us terrified of the ocean, even though falling off a ladder is far more likely. You see the pattern? Our minds aren't evil. They're just flawed. They evolved for survival, not for truth. We leap to conclusions. We defend bad ideas. We follow crowds. We confuse feelings for facts. So what do? You become a student of error. You memorize your own weaknesses. You build systems to check your gut. You slow down, you double check. You pause before acting. You build your life on logic, not impulse. I've made fewer mistakes than most people, not because I'm smarter, but because I assume I'm stupid, and I plan accordingly. The best minds I know aren't the most brilliant. They're the most careful, the most self-aware, the most allergic to beasts, including their own. This isn't just about avoiding bad decisions. It's about seeing the world clearly through the fog of illusion. Once you do that, everything changes. You stop being a puppet. You start pulling your own strings. Let's say you wanted to do well in life, not just rich, but wise, respected, and calm. Where would you start? I'll tell you where I did. I began by asking, what's the minimum knowledge a person needs to live intelligently in the world? Not specialized genius stuff. Just elementary worldly wisdom. The kind that helps you avoid big mistakes and spot big opportunities. You'd be amazed how rare that kind of thinking is. Now, think about how most people operate. They lean too hard on one skill set: finance, law, tech, thinking it'll solve all problems. That's like trying to build a house with only a hammer. You need a whole toolbox. That's what worldly wisdom is. A toolbox for the mind. So I went shopping for tools. Not just from business, but from physics, biology, psychology, and engineering. Each field has models, ways of seeing the world that are deeply useful outside their original territory. Take thermodynamics, for instance. Heat spreads. Pressure builds. Systems seek equilibrium. Same applies in economics and social life. Or think about feedback loops. From engineering, positive loops spiral out of control. Negative ones stabilize. You see those everywhere, from markets to habits. And psychology? Oh boy, that one's the mother lode. Understand how people think, what they fear, how they make decisions, and you've got a cheat code for life. Most folks don't even understand themselves, let alone others. The key, though, is not to memorize facts. It's to understand the principles and to recognize when and where to apply them. That's where the magic happens. It's a little like learning how to cook. You don't need every recipe. You need to know heat, salt, fat, and acid. Once you understand the core elements, you can make anything taste good. But this requires effort, real thinking. Not just Googling, not just parroting experts. You have to build your mind like a craftsman, piece by piece, model by model, until it clicks together. And once it does, life starts to feel less random. You make fewer dumb bets. You stop falling for illusions. You start to anticipate consequences. You get steadier. It's not about knowing everything. It's about knowing enough to stay out of trouble, and occasionally to spot something others miss. That's elementary worldly wisdom. It won't win you a Nobel Prize, but it might just win you a good life. Investing isn't just numbers on a screen. It's a game of temperament, not just intelligence. And let me be blunt, most folks lose that game because they're wired to act foolish when it matters most. Let me start with a simple truth. You don't need 150 IQ points to succeed in investing. What you need is discipline, patience, and the ability to ignore the crowd when the crowd is going mad. If you can keep your cool, you've already won half the battle. Now, there's this idea floating around that the market is efficient, that all prices reflect all known information. Rubbish. The market is part logic, part madness. At times it reflects reality. Other times it reflects emotion, panic, greed, and headlines. So how do you survive it? Start by knowing your circle of competence. That's your safe zone. Stay in it. Don't wander into biotech stocks because your dentist gave you a hot tip. If you don't understand the business, skip it. Nobody's forcing you to play every hand. Next, think long term. And I don't mean a year or two. I mean a decade. Real wealth comes from owning good businesses and letting them compound, not from trading in and out like a caffeinated squirrel. Take Coca-Cola, for example. It's a simple business. They sell sugar water with branding, and people love it. It's consistent, predictable. You don't need a PhD to understand why it works. That's the kind of business I like, where time is your friend, not your enemy. But even with great companies, you've got to be patient. The market doesn't reward impatience, it punishes it. Sometimes a stock goes nowhere for years. Then one day it doubles. If you bailed early, you missed the whole thing. Then there's diversification. People talk about it like it's some magic shield. I don't buy it. Diversification is for people who don't know what they're doing. If you know a business code, really understand it, why would you dilute your best ideas? Now, let's talk about incentives. Always follow the incentives. People will do what they're paid to do, what they're rewarded for. That includes CEOs, brokers, analysts, and yes, fund managers. If someone makes money whether you win or lose, don't expect them to have your interests at heart. And beware of envy. It's a poison. You'll always find someone making more money, faster, flashier. Ignore them. Stick to your game. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. You don't need to be the richest. Just solving insane. Here's another trap. Confirmation bias. Investors love to read things that support what they already believe. That's how bubbles grow. Instead, be your own devil's advocate. Argue the opposite of your position. Try to disprove yourself. If your idea survives that, it's probably decent. And when the tide turns, because it always does, don't be the last one to admit you were wrong. Change your mind. Cut your losses. Live to fight another day. Pride has no place in investing. Finally, never forget, cash is an option. It gives you time. It gives you power. It gives you the ability to act when others are paralyzed. Don't feel pressured to always be in. Sometimes the best move is to sit on your hands and wait. Investing isn't easy, but it is simple. Think rationally, act slowly, stick to what you understand. And above all, be humble. The market doesn't care who you are. It only rewards those who respect risk and time.